They got me. You know, I said in the last video that I didn't anticipate any more updates on Mass Effect Legendary Edition, given it's a month until launch as of today. Clearly, I spoke too soon, so now I'm gonna drink this monster in my hand rather aggressively. I hope this gesture kind of expresses my excitement as well as my personal torment. Folks, as usual, it's your old buddy Ryan here coming to you from, well, my house. We got a new update for Mass Effect Legendary Edition. This one is focused on visuals. Now, this is not something that we did not know about.
We knew the visuals were upscaled and remastered in 4K. We knew they were changing up the lighting and what have you. This is all stuff that we know. Two things I want to point out to you. The links will be in the description down below to the new trailer that showcases the differences in the remaster Mass Effect 1 and the original Mass Effect. I will be breaking down a bit of it as we go over the information. And two, as usual on the EA site, there's a whole write-up going over the various improvements and how they went about upscaling some of the textures and cutscenes. I will also be reading some of the small excerpts, and again, those links will be in the description. I will of course tell you to go check those out if you want, instead of watching me or listening to me ramble and drone on and on about blue alien ass.
Yeah. Now, I know you all love this part, but I gotta do it. I gots to, man. If you end up liking the video, liking what you saw here, consider subscribing to the channel. It'll help me grow beautiful wings so I can soar.
If you need to see more or feel you've seen enough, consider subscribing to someone else you like more. I'm sure they would appreciate it. Okay, now that that's out of the way, Mass Effect. Clearly, in my estimation, BioWare is pulling out all of the stops with this remaster, at least that's what it seems like. And I think that's very apparent just in the way that they talk about the game here, essentially describing the process as if they went in with needle-nose pliers like a game of Operation and replaced the old organs and parts with some brand new, bright and shiny 4K organs and parts.
First off, if you look at the side-by-side comparison trailer, you'll see shots of Mass Effect 1 Remaster with Shepard on the Citadel Presidium, with that juxtaposed to the original. It's apparent right away the difference. The remastered Citadel is brighter, colors are more vibrant, more detail in the trees, and water effects. Something you will notice very quickly with all these side-by-side comparisons is that the Legendary Edition is overall much brighter and much more colorful. You see this right away in the first shots comparing the Citadel from the original. You also notice more of an ambient fog in the distance. Our next shot is the Mako driving on Virmire, and again you see that side-by-side comparison of Virmire in the original and the remaster, and it shows that it's much more bright and colorful, and everything feels much more real and lively. Then we see Mass Effect 3's default Fem Shep in all her glory in Mass Effect 1, and the side-by-side with the original. It's insane just how vastly improved the textures and models are.
Look at Caden back there, looking all cute in 4K. You handsome devil, you. Then we see the Mako again traveling across the planet of Therum, and the lava and the fog and particle effects, for a lack of a better way of saying it, it just looks good juxtaposed to the original. And look, I'm not saying it because I like saying it, but I played the original Mass Effect recently, and just the other day I was playing Mass Effect 2 just to try it out and see how it compared. And I still think that they look fairly decent, I really do, but they do feel a bit older. I saw some very blurry textures, and even now, just the lighting, you don't realize at the time we didn't realize how dark that game was. In some ways, even looking at some of the changes they made to Noveria, it just looks so much more desolate and intimidating to traverse.
This brings me to the write-up on the EA website. As I said, I'll be reading some of the snippets of it, but not all. Just want to be clear, because if you came here to listen to me read, I truly don't know why. It begins with this first part.
Phase 1, building the foundation. We started Phase 1 by identifying and cataloging every asset in the trilogy. How many particle effects, 3D models, textures, levels, GUI, elements, sounds, cinematic movies, etc. actually exist across the trilogy, and on average, what are their quality levels? Do the source assets, the content creation files, still exist? What percentage of those assets should we improve? And on average, how long will each asset type take to improve? Knowing the sheer number of assets and their quality levels shaped our strategy for improving each type of asset. Skipping ahead a little bit. First, we increased the engine limits on texture sizes, so any textures that were authored larger than could be used on disk could now use their full resolutions. We then wrote some batch processes that worked along with an AI upres program to increase the original uncompressed textures to 4 times their originally authored sizes. Our batch tools made special consideration to maintain the validity of special texture types, like normal maps or masks, to ensure colors didn't contaminate each other. So what's basically being described here is that they went back and took stock of all their assets and determined what they needed to do and what they had to remaster or work on.
One game is quite an undertaking, but we are talking about a whole trilogy. That's tons of assets that need to be reworked, retextured, maybe even rebuilt.
That was a bunch of technical stuff, and if you didn't understand it or did but want a simplified explanation, they basically did an up-res of the textures and then went in and tweaked some of the assets even more to make them look better. The next part of the trailer then begins to show off some of these new textures. We get to see Ashley in her beautiful pink armor. That's definitely fitting of the Alliance Navy.
You then see Thane as well, and if you look closely as it cycles between the two shots of Thane from the original games, now you can even see the individual scales on his face more clearly now.
And that definitely seems a good example of how much detail is being put into the remaster of this game. Even with Tally, just seeing how the textures are now, well, they're actually textures. And when I was saying before they didn't age too well in some instances, it's nowhere more apparent than some of these screenshots in these juxtapositions in these scenes that they show.
Even Garrus, or as I like to call him, the ultimate bro of Mass Effect. You see the cracks and scratches all over his armor and face in much more graphic detail, and it leaves me puzzled why he didn't just get another suit of armor. Like, come on, man, I would have taken you.
Then there is Liara, of course. You see the little wrinkles on her outfit, and of course she looks more blue. She has more realistic coloring on her face and features as well. It's not as smooth, she has more defined features. Then you have a few cutscenes that show some in-action scenes of Ashley from Mass Effect 1 on Eden Prime, and you again see the improved lighting and textures there. And going to Zaid, it's not exactly a drastic difference to Mass Effect 2, but it's simple in how it's more readily visible. For example, his eye, it just looks more realistic, like there's something wrong with it. It ain't real. Maybe?
In regards to everything I described in the trailer, I want to turn to a few pieces of that write-up on EA's website, on those character models and assets.
Some assets, most frequently characters and generic props, were shared between the games, and many had already been improved in a later title or DLC. For those cases, we generally used the improved asset as our base, improved it further, and then ported it across the whole trilogy. This resulted in more consistent and higher quality assets, but we had to carefully ensure this process didn't flatten the sense of passage of time and the overall narrative.
In simple terms, they imported newly built or improved assets across all games, while making sure that the appearances still acknowledge the passage of time in the galaxy. Unfortunately, that's not something you're going to be able to see in the new trailer, the passage of time.
But you will see things like more realistic skin rendering, and obviously more defined textures and armor and outfits, scratches, cuts, wrinkles, and more. And more realistic iris shading. And as I said before, if you look at Anderson side by side with his remastered version and his original version, my dude was looking rough before.
You can kind of see with Therum as well, and you see it if you watched any of the videos or seen any of the screenshots of the various other planets like Pharos, Novaria, and Vermeer. There's higher quality particles and visual effects like smoke, fire, and explosions, and even with the way the Mako's wheels hit the ground of the various worlds and you see the dirt get kicked up. And of course, who can forget those dramatic lens flares that they added, as they describe in the write-up.
The VFX artists were busy extending the length and smoothness of animations for things like smoke and fire, while also adding some secondary emitters to beef up the overall look of each effect. A fire might now have a secondary smoke trail and sparks, explosions fling chunks of rubble, and the muzzle flash on your weapons now subtly illuminates Shepard and their surroundings. New environment particles effects were added throughout the trilogy to better enhance the mood and a space's sense of life. As many of you have already noticed, we also sharpened up and added secondary elements to the trilogy's iconic horizontal lens flare. Lens flare is how you say that word. Which actually brings us to probably, at least for me, the most noticeable part of all the visual enhancements, the lighting. As you will notice throughout the video I've been showing clips of here, it's quite a stark difference from the original to now. Everything just looks brighter. Whereas the original looked incredibly dark by comparison. I'm sure some of you out there may have liked that as far as the style of the game, but I think it gives the characters more time to shine, quite literally. After all, they did an extensive amount of work remastering and updating the game. It's definitely better than, and we can see that more clearly here. Our lighting designers follow closely behind the level artists, ensuring that all of the beautified environments and characters were always shown in their best, well, light. Mass Effect's specific lighting style features high contrast spotlights and a heavy use of complementary colors. That style was refined heavily throughout the trilogy, so we were able to bring on many of those improvements back into the first game. We focused on maintaining the high contrast look while adding natural bounce lighting to ensure characters are lit more consistently and beautifully.
And again, I have enjoyed throughout this whole process is that they're not just talking, they're showing us what they have done. And if you go on the website, as I've referenced multiple times, you can drag back and forth a slider on some of these images to see the before and after. I do wonder what the rest of you will think, but at least in my opinion, there's no doubt it's a massive improvement. I stand by the idea that these games were some of the best looking games out there when they first released, but just through the process of the games having aged, they don't look as sharp as they used to. One last thing I want to share from this section, and then we just have a couple of more things to go through and we're all done.
We made systemic upgrades to shadows and added or improved post-process effects such as screen space, ambient occlusion, anti-aliasing, and depth of field, increasing the cinematic quality for out-of-focus cameras. We were also able to bring down engine features that existed in Mass Effect 3, such as dynamic volumetrics, to help unify the look of the first two games.
This brings us to my favorite part of the comparison trailer, and this goes to what I said before about how BioWare is not just telling us, they're showing us. They show a short dialogue scene with a custom Commander Shepard, and what I like here is that they don't just show the original Mass Effect, they show you the remaster, and they pull out all the filters and edits and then slowly reapply them to show us exactly how they achieved a more cinematic and realistic look.
Look, I don't want to bore you by going through every single level's details and how they captured a more lore-friendly and even realistic-looking worlds, which feels weird to say given that they're not real. But suffice to say, everything we talked about up until this point is reflected in the screenshots and video. You see better-looking fire effects and smoke, and the new lighting on Pharos, for example, so it looks less drab and more, for lack of a better word, ambient. It gives the world almost an uncanny feel to it, unsettling. They intensified the storm in Novaria, so you can't really see anything. And something that they didn't mention here, but they did in a previous video, and it speaks to how much they've reworked the engine here, is in Novaria, there used to be a wall in the little office building area that you go into. And they took it down because of kind of obfuscating part of the level. And BioWare plainly said that they did this to not have to render the whole area all at once, since you don't see it behind the wall, but now they're able to do that based on the changes that they've made, so they removed it entirely.
One last thing I wanted to point out that seemed kind of a debate amongst fans. Eden Prime lost its red sky.
At least it seemed in some of the screenshots and videos. BioWare responded to that debate and said they would address that shot at a later date. They specifically call out Eden Prime here and give more detail on that red sky. Eden Prime is the first location you land on in Mass Effect. It's described to you as a verdant paradise planet under attack by an unknown alien ship, but the sight that greeted players didn't always align with that image. Luckily, in Mass Effect 3, From Ashes DLC, which is of course included in the Legendary Edition, we'd already revisited Eden Prime so we can incorporate its overall atmosphere and specific buildings. We've moved the sun's placement so that the player's path forward is now illuminated by the evening light, while the burnt red sky looms behind, punctuated by falling ash and tracer fire. We also improved the planet's surface with additional fire and battle damage, more foliage, and destroyed structures littering the crater Sovereign leaves behind.
So look, if I'm reading that right, the red sky is less immediate and more continuously spreading as the player progresses through the level. Clearly, effort was made to make Eden Prime more closely resemble the lore without removing the atmosphere, and even making it more of a slowly progressing ambience that will follow you as you play. While that remains to be seen in the game, it does seem to be quite a small change in the grand scheme of the larger changes that we've discussed throughout this video. Anyway, if you're still with me here, I hope you enjoyed this trailer and visual breakdown of the various improvements in Mass Effect Legendary Edition. If you're not still with me, then I don't really have anything to say to you because you weren't here, so you're not hearing this part anyway.
That was your brief breakdown of the latest Mass Effect information. It's nothing that they haven't talked about or described before, so this may not be the biggest news we have gotten. It definitely isn't. But at least to me, it shows the extent of work BioWare has poured into this remaster.
I'm looking forward to seeing it in action more and getting my hands on it. For now, as usual, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If not, give it a thumbs down. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Comments. Yes. I will see you soon. Thanks for watching, and I love you all. Maybe.